Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the debate about the European dilemma over the Nord Stream 2 on the, organized by the Institute for Politics and Society. I'm Martin L. from the Czech economic daily Hospodářské noviny, and I will be the moderator of this debate, where we'll have a distinguished guests from Germany, United States, and Czech Republic. Friedbert Flieger, a former CDU politician, Advanced Security and Strategic Integration Studies at the University in Bonn. We have Daniel Fried, a Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow from Atlantic Council and former US Ambassador to Poland, so very familiar with the situation in Central Europe. And Václav Bartuška, Ambassador for Energy Security from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic. Before we will go into the debate, I would kindly ask Šárka Prát, member of the board of European Liberal Forum, for the introductory remarks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to welcome you to this online debate on the European dilemma over Nord Stream 2. My name is Šárka Prát and I'm a board member of the European Liberal Forum and the executive director of the Institute for Politics and Society, who are the main organizers of this debate. Despite the fact that you are joining us from your computers, mobile phones, or tablets, we are glad that you are with us. It's my pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the European Liberal Forum, which brings together almost 50 liberally oriented think tanks, institutions, and foundations from all over Europe. Together, we are creating a space for dialogue on European integration, liberal policies, ideas, and above all, the future of Europe. Discussions on such topics are especially relevant as we mark 1 year since the pandemic changed the social, economic, and political realities of European countries. In light of the changing economic landscapes through Europe today, we will discuss the European dilemma over Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream is a system of pipelines for the transport of natural gas from Russia to Germany through the Baltic Sea. These pipelines reduce reliance upon the Ukrainian pipeline. The first Nord Stream was completed in 2011 and connected Vyborg in Russia to Greifswaldem in Germany. Nord Stream 2 was initially scheduled to be completed at the end of 2019, connecting Usť-Luga in Russia with Greifswald in Germany. However, sanctions imposed by the US have delayed its completion. For logistical and economic reasons, Germany and Russia are major proponents of the Nord Stream pipelines. However, the US views the pipelines as a strengthening of Russian influence in Europe, increasing Europeans' dependency on Russian gas and subsequently weakening transatlantic cooperation. Ukraine, too, opposes the Nord Stream pipelines, and the country is going to lose billions of dollars in pipeline transit fees. The construction of Nord Stream will have complicated political ramifications, and I hope that those will be discussed today. On behalf of the European Liberal Forum, allow me to wish you a fruitful discussion. I firmly believe that the thought-provoking discussions we are accustomed to having during our events will be reflected in a virtual form as well.
Thank you very much. And then we will go directly to the introductory remarks of our panelists. So it's Germany, which is bringing this topic on the table in the European scene. So I would first ask Friedbert Flieger for his introductory talk.
Well, thank you, Šárka. Thank you, Martin, for having me. It's a great honor to be in this panel. Let me first of all say, I believe that my government is doing the right thing here. So I'm a supporter of the German government. It is, in our point of view, first of all, a commercial project, not because we believe that geopolitical questions do not play a role, but it is, we have liberalized energy markets. We have a very liquid gas market with many suppliers in Europe. With 30 LNG terminals, with interconnectors. So it is a pretty mature infrastructure today. We have all the permissions gotten for the Nord Stream 2 project. And as you know, it is not only Gazprom, it is 5 major European companies which are partnering with Gazprom on this project. So first of all, it is a commercial project, and I do not even know how you really want to stop it without paying billions of euro in compensation for the investment that has already been done. My second point is, I have, and Dan Fried knows that from a long time, I've been a strong proponent of diversification of energy routes. I was in favor, and I am in favor, of the Trans-Adriatic pipeline, of bringing more LNG to Europe. Therefore, I and my company for which I work also supports LNG terminals, the construction of a German terminal right now, of interconnectors, storage facilities, reverse flow, so that you can sell the gas to all parts of Europe. Well, and because of this view of diversification, we have today, and that's the opposite to the situation 10 years ago, we have an infrastructure which makes it impossible for Russia to blackmail us. Many of the arguments against Nord Stream 2 were legitimate 10 years ago. Today, I think, in the moment Russia would try to blackmail us, we would have a lot of alternatives. But our German experience is that Russia does not blackmail us with gas. Throughout the Cold War, even in the worst times of the Cold War, the gas flow was reliable. And given all the tensions that we have and had during the Cold War and afterwards with Russia, we should ask ourselves whether we should put more oil in the fire, or whether we should not leave this part of the relationship where we were able to have a relationship without major tensions untouched. In our point of view, the gas pipes deal of Willy Brandt 50 years ago helped a lot to secure peace and stability in Europe, and therefore we do not see why this should be changed. And we are happy of all those. Dan Fried is today with us. He has written a very interesting and encouraging piece together with Richard Morningstar in the blog of the Atlantic Council, saying, well, we should leave sanctions behind us, try to find a solution which helps the Ukraine, which gives securities to the Poles. I do not want to circumvent Ukraine. Ukraine is important to us. So it was my government, together with the EU, which helped bring about the transit agreement between Russia, Ukraine, and between these two countries, that they continue with the gas transit. And we can prolong that agreement. That's a suggestion of Dan, and I absolutely agree with that. So let's try to disarm a little bit on that issue. And I understand that Václav Bartuška and the Czech government also argues in that direction. Try to get the tensions away and not always do muscle flexing, new sanctions against European allies. That is something we never had before. And if we want to embark on an ambitious climate and energy security agenda with the US, and I want to do that wholeheartedly, then we have to get rid of these sanctions, which are not sanctions against Russia, but against European companies. And that does not fit to a partnership, to a transatlantic partnership. So first the sanctions away, and then we can discuss everything. And the transatlantic relationship has always been strong enough to deal with differences of this kind, and it should do so in the future without threats and sanctions. And that is what I hope we can have as a result also of this meeting today.
Thank you very much. So we can jump over the ocean to Dan Fried and his view from United States.
Good afternoon. a pleasure to be here, and my thanks to the European Liberal Forum for organizing this meeting. It may surprise you that although I am known as a hawk on Putin, and rightfully so, I am actually not an enthusiast of sanctions, the use of sanctions to try to kill Nord Stream 2. And I disagree with some of what Friedberg said, but I also know that in what he said, there is sufficient common ground for us to build on, to find a satisfactory solution, but we're going to have to work hard and we're going to have to work fast. That's basically my bottom line. Now, let me start. One, Nord Stream 2 is, in my view, a really bad idea. Friedberg pointed out that Russia has never tried to use gas as a weapon against Germany. That's true. But it has used gas as a weapon against Ukraine. And it has threatened the Baltic states and Poland. I was in Kyiv a number of years ago when it was cold inside every building because the Russians had cut off the gas supplies. Around New Year's, they did it twice. Putin will use gas as a weapon. And the problem with Nord Stream 2 is that it allows Putin to continue selling gas to Germany and Western Europe and potentially give him the option of squeezing the Balts and the Poles and the Central Europeans. That's why Nord Stream 2 is a bad idea. It also allows the Russians to deprive Ukraine of its transit fees for gas, although Friedberg also said something which is certainly true and hopeful that doesn't get enough emphasis. Over the past 15 years, Europe in general and Central Europe in particular has greatly attenuated potential Russian energy, gas energy leverage over it by building a system of interconnectors and beginning to build alternative pipelines and beginning to build LNG terminals to deprive the Kremlin of the ability to do what I said earlier, what I was concerned about, which is supply gas to Germany while squeezing Poland, Ukraine, and countries of Central Europe. This is a major success of European energy policy over the past 15 years. It means that Nord Stream 2 is not as dangerous as it used to be. But I don't think we're yet where Friedberg said we were, where Nord Stream 2 gives the Kremlin no leverage. It still gives it some. Now, the opposition to Nord Stream 2 is not just from Washington. It is from across Europe and within Germany. The Green Party has come out formally against Nord Stream 2 for strategic reasons. So this is not America versus Europe and not America versus Germany. It is a divisive issue, and Nord Stream 2 is inconsistent with the integrity of an EU energy system. However, Friedberg is also right that the Trump administration was so aggressive, so nasty, and seemed to relish the fight with Berlin, so much so that it made the kind of discussion we're having now almost impossible over the past 4 years. What a stupid waste. I'm not holding back here. The Trump administration seemed to regard the fight with Germany as the objective. Not the problem of Nord Stream 2, which I think is a real problem, but they wanted to fight with Germany because Trump can't stand Angela Merkel or something. I mean, for God's sakes. So you see what I'm driving at. The opposition in the United States to Nord Stream 2 is intense. The Biden administration is under pressure from Democrats and Republicans to hit and try to kill the project with sanctions. They're under pressure right now. The next report that is required under the sanctions legislation is due in May. We don't have a lot of time. We do, however, have some time. The point of the article that Dick Morningstar, Dan Stahn, and I wrote, that Friedberg referred to, the point of the article was to suggest to the Biden administration that it in fact has alternatives other than simply surrendering to Nord Stream 2 or escalating the sanctions war with Germany. And we suggested a number of ways forward, which are intended to be constructive. In my ideal scenario, Germany would find a way to suspend work on Nord Stream 2. The US would announce that while that work was suspended, it was suspending any further action on sanctions, period. And that the stakeholders would start consulting on a way to mitigate the downside risks of Nord Stream 2. You understand that this presumes that Nord Stream 2 would go through, but it would go through accompanied by a series of commitments and measures, which would mean that the remaining energy leverage that Nord Stream 2 gives Putin would be further attenuated. You can call this the European solidarity solution or the transatlantic solidarity solution. I don't care, as long as we find a way forward. Now, what do I know? I'm not in the Biden administration. I know that the people there are well aware of the challenge. You know that Tony Blinken did a graduate school thesis, which he turned into a book on the fight with the Reagan administration's fight with Germany over the Soviet era gas pipeline and the Reagan administration's decision to lift the sanctions in return for German and European agreement to work with the United States on a common economic policy toward the Soviets. So the precedent for this kind of deal exists, and it's always good to invoke Ronald Reagan as precedent, especially when you've got a problem with the Republicans. But the German government has to decide, and decide soon, that it wants to work out the issue. Politically, the Biden administration cannot afford to say that Nord Stream 2 is good. Politically, maybe Germany may not want to say that it made a mistake with Nord Stream 2, though after the German elections, this might change. Diplomacy, and I did it for 40 years, is the art of constructing a solution that gives both sides the opportunity to do the right thing without one side having to destroy itself politically.
Lose face, yeah.
Final thought. I served 8 years in the administration of George W. Bush. I know about policies that go wrong. I do not consider Berlin the problem. I consider Putin the problem. I consider that Nord Stream 2 is a mistake. But a mistake is something you have to help your friends work out. Just as Germany reconnected with the United States after the fight over the war in Iraq in the second Bush term, Germany did this. We Americans have to understand that the point is not to fight with Germany. European energy security that embraces the concerns of the Balts, the Poles, the Ukrainians, brings them into this process of finding a solution and leaves us all better off. I realize that sounds hopelessly optimistic, but I believe it is possible. I also believe the Biden administration would love to find a way forward along these lines if there were willingness. So my last thought, and I promise it's the last, is the German government needs to decide it wants to make this work. If they do, the Americans have to listen and make it possible. And I urge the same from the Poles and the Ukrainians. What I would say to the Poles is, you're right about Nord Stream 2. It's a bad idea. You're right. But the point is not to be right in an argument. The point is solidarity of the West, figuring out the best way to leave us better off and not Putin better off. So thank you for this opportunity. I've tried to lay it out in blunt terms, but this is exactly the right kind of conversation to have.
Thank you, Ambassador Fried. Unfortunately, we don't have any poll on the panel. Maybe I can play one later on with my interest in Poland. But now I would like to ask Václav Bartuška for his thoughts from the Prague's perspective.
Well, okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I will not play a poll, but I am Central European, so I will start with saying that Czech Republic is in a very different situation when it comes to natural gas from the rest of our neighbors to the east and south from us. The Czech Republic has fully linked to the Northwestern Europe gas market. All the gas in this country is sold in Rotterdam. 100%, almost 99.8% of gas to the Czech Republic comes from Germany. And whether it's Russian or Norwegian or LNG, we don't care. You know, our policy is very simple. We want the same stability of price and same stability of deliveries as Bavaria has. As simple as that. And we have that. We didn't have a problem with Russia for a long time. In the same time, I must repeat what Dan Fried already said, that there are quite a few countries to the east of us who had experienced blackmail in energy. But the Baltic countries, quite a few Central European countries. So I think we have to understand the sentiment, which is very strong in many countries on this one. For us, Czechs, and I believe for others in Central Eastern Europe, the fight between Germany and US is the worst possible conflict. Because if you force Prague, Bratislava, Budapest, Bucharest, or others to choose between Berlin and Washington, you're basically doing Putin's work. You're destroying the strongest alliance there is. So we very much hope in US-German, let's say, alignment on this issue. We understand there is possibility for this. And not to speak too long, the final thing, I do believe that we can find solution for keeping Ukrainian transit running and making an honest and decent deal for Ukraine. That will also mean for Ukrainians to actually do something very painful for them, to finally install meters for gas on the Russian-Ukrainian borders. And those of you who have seen me before probably have heard it many times from me. You know, it's going to be 30 years in August this year since the independence of Ukraine, since the demise of Soviet Union. In those 30 years, Ukraine has changed incredibly. There is now fight in the east. Ukraine has lost Crimea. There's very different Ukraine emerging. But when it comes to natural gas, plenty of the old relationships, and I don't mean it in a good sense, is still there. So if we Europeans, together with Americans, are to negotiate and help to bring about a compromise which would keep Ukrainian transit flowing, we will need meters on Russian-Ukrainian borders. We will need data about the real flows. You know, I do remember from 2009 when we had the Czech EU presidency, and I was actually the point man between Moscow and Kiev. And the fact that Putin and Medvedev and Sechin knew the numbers, they knew how much gas is flowing or not flowing, and Ukrainian side, Yushchenko, Tymoshenko, and others, did not know. That's still deeply engraved in my mind and in my memory. So we are willing to help Ukraine, and I think we can find a compromise together with the US and Germany and the European Union. We will need also some very serious work on part of the Ukrainians. And that's all for me.
I hope not. Thank you very much. Well, then I would also should play a role of Ukrainian now here. But before we go to the questions from the public, I have a couple of mine. And maybe it's first to Mr. Flieger. With you and Daniel Fried have mentioned the question of the future German government after the elections. We have seen that the German Greens, possible coalition partner, have put the stopping of Nord Stream into their program even. So how to think about the future German government not canceling the project if the Greens will be in the government, or to put it the other way around, can Nord Stream 2 be the obstacle to form the government between, possibly, of course we are speculating now, possibly between Christian Democrats and Greens?
Well, I believe it will be an issue, but the possible coalition partners for the Greens are the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats. Both parties are strongly committed to Nord Stream 2. And so you need a compromise. And my guess is that Nord Stream almost being completed, that we will at the end have a solution which is very close to that what Dan Fried and also Mr. Bartuszka have in mind for Europe as well. We will need additional security for Ukraine, what concerns the transit, prolong the transit agreement. We will have the Baltic, we will continue with the Baltic pipeline between Norway, Denmark, and Poland. We will have more interconnectors. We will have an LNG terminal in Germany, decided then in Stade or in Brunsbüttel or in both. Both are seriously trying to build one. So we will have a variety of issues which make a compromise possible, in my point of view. A government will not will come about, and Nord Stream will not be hindering that. But if I may address just 2 points of Wacław Bartuszka. First of all, I'm absolutely aware of the Polish feelings. That's a traditional historic feeling in Poland. Always when the Russians and the Germans come too close to each other, the Poles get alarmed. And for good reasons, if you look to history. I've been 10 years the chairman of the German-Polish Society. And as an MP, I was responsible for the NATO and EU enlargement for Poland. And that's the time when I met the first time Ambassador Fried. So I'm familiar with the Polish sentiment, but we have done everything to please them. Baltic pipeline with public money from Europe, interconnectors, the two LNG terminals, one in Poland, the other one in Lithuania. And they make it practically impossible for Gazprom, and I agree, Gazprom has taken them hostage. They could dictate their gas prices in the past. But the mere fact that we have 2 LNG terminals there make it impossible for them. And immediately after they were installed, Gazprom had to reduce the prices. And if the prices are going wrong, there are alternatives today. So this situation, compared to the Ukrainian-Russian gas crisis in 2009, has changed. And I'm happy that Ambassador Fried does not deny that, but acknowledges that. So let us come out of this situation, this feeling as if we still are in 2009. We are not anymore. And but also understand, of course, the sentiments. And here my government probably should have done a better job in the past to discuss that, to have a package done, to respect the Ukrainian fears. But we are doing this right now together with the Americans. And again, I absolutely agree that Dan Fried is right. We have to find a solution which is not escalating the situation. An escalation with Russia in the Baltic Sea is not an easy thing, on the one hand, and on the other hand, we should prevent that someone has to surrender. I've been one of the few Germans who stood up for the Iraq War. We probably all know that today this was a mistake. But at that time, I was not convinced either, like Joschka Fischer, whether it was the right thing to do. But I said, we are in a coalition, we are in a partnership with NATO, with the US, and we cannot leave them alone. The same was true in Vietnam. We were never happy with the Vietnam War, but we stood at the side of our American friends. So what we have in common is so much more important that we should not let an issue like Nord Stream 2 interfere. And the wisest thing today was what Václav said, if the Poles have to make a decision between Berlin and Washington, we're not going to do a right job. We have to overcome that situation.
Václav Bartuška is asking for his reaction.
Just a small detail on the situation in Germany. Never underestimate the Russian ability to shoot themselves in their own foot. And there has been a change to some extent in the German political thinking since September 2nd of last year, when Germany announced that Alexei Navalny was poisoned. And there's been a fundamental change in approach to Nord Stream 2. And even more so after Minister Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in November said that Navalny was perhaps poisoned by Germany. I do have many German colleagues, and we are public servants and we sometimes do difficult things, but we do not poison people. And we do not like being accused of doing that. So if Russia wanted something to be done, and they still need approval for the pipeline once it's being finished, accusing German officials of poisoning Navalny was not the best thing to do. And I must say that I very much respect the restraint on part of my German counterparts for not saying very harsh things about this afterwards, because it's been really, really outrageous thing to say. So we will see. Germany has a tool, which is certification of the pipeline once it's being finished. Once it's done, the certification for the operation is in the hands of the German Agency for the Networks, the BNetzA. So there is still plenty of leverage on the German side over Russians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would have a question to Daniel Fried to a little bit more to understand this kind of dichotomy from the Biden's administration. On one side, we see the quite harsh rhetoric against Russia, but and Biden himself and State Secretary Blinken, they have their experience of dealing with the Russians. But on the other hand, you mentioned that they would probably welcome some kind of solution not to use the sanctions or somehow go around them. So what we can expect from the Biden's administration as a kind of, putting aside the question of trust to Russia or to Putin or to Russian politics, but what might be the steps Americans would like to do to kind of change the situation we have now?
I agree with your characterization of the Biden administration. The senior foreign policy team has a lot of experience with Russia, and unlike the Obama people, they are not going to be tempted by an unwarranted reset. Okay, look, Tony Blinken, I can tell you, was on the harder edge in the Obama administration responding to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Victoria Nuland, who's going to be, if the Senate confirms her, Undersecretary for Political Affairs, is well known in Europe. She's about as hawkish on Putin as I am. But I also note that the Biden administration's first move with Russia was a pragmatic move to extend the New START treaty. In other words, they are willing to speak frankly and honestly and be tough, but also to continue to cooperate with Moscow in areas of common interest, and I support this policy. We need a common transatlantic approach to Russia. I suspect the Biden administration will want to develop one. Any decent common approach to Russia is going to have the following elements. It's going to have an element of pushing back and resisting Putin's aggression. 2, it's going to have an element of stabilizing the relationship. 3, it's going to have an element of cooperating in areas where we can. And 4, it's going to have an element of investing in a better future, with a better Russia, reaching out to Russian society And, either you call it building bridges of understanding or supporting independent Russian society, but it is outreach to the Russian people. Now, those 4 pillars won't be exactly adopted, as I said, but those pillars are similar to the EU's own policy toward Russia that it adopted a number of years ago. This is not particularly original. That is the policy I suspect the Biden team will move toward. Now, how does this relate to Nord Stream 2? The Biden administration wants to strengthen transatlantic relations. It is pro-European. It wants to patch things up with Germany. The fight over Nord Stream 2 gets in the way. But the Biden administration also believes that Nord Stream 2 is a mistake. Hence, I think they are going to be interested in an approach like the one I outlined. That approach, and Friedberg was talking about some of the elements. It's exactly right. More interconnectors, LNG terminals, probably a green element of supporting Poland and the Balts working with renewables. And I would add stricter enforcement of the EU third energy package so that Nord Stream 2 doesn't get a carve out. And fourth, some protection of Ukraine's long-term gas agreement with Russia, including perhaps the development of contingency sanctions or snapback sanctions, but not directed against German or West European or European companies, but directed against Russian targets if the Russians either violate the long-term gas agreement with Ukraine or curtail, cut, or reduce without good reason gas deliveries to any EU member state. Work this out in advance and call it a European solidarity package. I think the Biden administration would be interested in that. I think it would be a project that people could work on, but we need to move quickly because the pressure on the Biden administration to impose sanctions is overwhelming. They're resisting it. Okay. Friedberg's transatlantic credentials are beyond question. And we Americans have to realize that even the German opponents of Nord Stream 2, or ones who are receptive to our strategic arguments, do not like being pushed by the Americans. Okay, we have to stop making this a fight with Germany. And a final thought about the Poles and the Balts. I think they're basically right. And to put what Friedberg was saying my way, not his way, and he's not responsible for what I'm about to say, let's just stipulate the Germans should be very careful before they tell Poles to calm down about Russians. Okay. But the Poles will also have to work with Germany if Germany wants to work with them. Being mad, even if you're right, and as I said, I think the Poles are right. Being right isn't sufficient. We have to make this work, okay? We have to make this work. The potential for common transatlantic approaches under a Biden administration is enormous. That is the Biden's, that's their default mode. I know these people. I wasn't on the campaign. I'm not in the administration, so I can say anything I want. But I know these people. I've known them for years, and Friedberg, so have you, right? They want to work with Europe. I mean, Tony Blinken went to school in Paris. No, he totally gets this stuff. His stepfather was, a Holocaust survivor rescued by the US Army in Germany. So he looks at America as, he understands the liberating potential, but it's in solidarity with Europe. In solidarity with Europe. Not at all the Trump approach, which is the opposite. And I see the potential for us to move ahead. And then the Czechs, I would say, look, if a deal is possible or a deal is in the offing, we will need maximum support for a fair deal that takes in the key stakeholders' concerns. Visegrad solidarity or 3 Cs initiative solidarity. And by the way, the 3 Cs initiative is a great way to start to mitigate the problem of Nord Stream 2. The fact that it was kind of originally Poland had a lot to do with the origins, that's a plus. Germany has supported 3 Cs. At least the president of Germany has attended 3 Cs summits. So bring that in as part of the package. If I were in the administration designing the package, I would try to put in something that helps everybody. That's how you make a package that works. And the key players, the European Commission, Germany, Poland, the Balts, the Ukrainians, and anybody else who thinks they have a big stake. Sorry to go on, but there's a lot on the table. And this is, this is exactly the kind of constructive, freewheeling conversation we need to help build consensus for the people in the German and American governments who want to do the right thing, and I'm convinced these people exist.
Thank you very much. If I understand correctly, you are telling us Europeans to do our homework on many fronts, which is what we are told by Americans in the last couple of decades. And here we are. I would have, before we go to the questions from the public, I would have the last question to Václav Bartuška, on which was also mentioned before by, I think, Ambassador Fried and Friedberg Flinger, about the infrastructure. It was the big issue in the Central Europe for many years. Now we have some LNG terminals, some new interconnectors. Is this already enough to say that this infrastructure already kind of rebalance the let's say potential of Russia to leverage the pressure with the gas here in Central Europe?
Well, let me put it this way. Those who wanted to build what needs to be built have already done so. The LNG terminal in Poland and Lithuania was already mentioned. We have done our homework back in 1990s. I am not really sure whether there will be much money or indeed any money in the EU funds for any fossil fuel projects in the European Union a couple of years from now. We already see the push to have excluded all the projects of common interest, the PCI, which are in natural gas or oil. And the green push will be here, that's for sure. We all remember that 10 years ago, Europe was talking about Nabucco pipeline. There is today simply no European major fossil project of this sort. So those who built it have already done so. Those who did not will have it more difficult because there will be probably less European money for it. But still, if you need it done, you get it done. I mean, we built our pipelines in Czech Republic back in 1990s without any help, without any European money, with our own money. It wasn't really cheap. I mean, the pipeline for oil cost $400 million, but it was worth it. The same goes for natural gas. So I would not really question the availability of funds. It's more a question of resolve of certain countries. And it's really interesting to look at some countries in Central Eastern Europe, which, despite the possibility to be connected to the West, prefer to have just one contract with a single supplier in Moscow. I'm quite happy that my government simply does not negotiate anything about natural gas with Moscow and hasn't done so for the last 20 years. I'm really happy about it. It's just a matter for the market, and the gas companies go to the Rotterdam exchange and buy the gas there. And it's liberating, I would say.
And it's a buyer's market today. It's a buyer's market. And may I, before the questions come, say one thing to Václav, and I'm pretty sure Daniel would agree. I would encourage a more active role of him personally or the Czech government in that bringing about of a compromise. I think it is exactly those voices we need to calm down. And if it comes from the Czech Republic, I agree, it's more credible for a poll than when it comes from Germany. So perhaps Prague can play a more active role in bringing about a solution, which is no surrender and no escalation.
We have 2 questions for you, Mr. Flieger. One is if you can comment Transatlantic coordinator Peter Berg call for construction moratorium on Nord Stream 2. Is it something like that possible to have a moratorium on the construction? And the second question is probably from you. Yes, you're from Ukraine. After all what happened with Georgia, Chechnya, Syria, cyber attacks, poisonings, what drives Germany to trust Kremlin as a reliable and honest partner in dealings, and finally calling Nord Stream 2 as a only business project? So from where is the trust of the Germany to the Russians as a business partners? I would put it like this.
Well, let me start with the latter question. I have the memory and the experience of the Cold War. And in the Cold War, we had even worse problems with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan. They played a destructive role almost all over in the world, in Angola. And well, even in Europe, they tried to support Euro-communist parties and do regime change in Europe. So we had a lot of tensions with Moscow, not to speak about the armament questions. And what we try to do is to find with an adversary some common ground, some peaceful coexistence, as it was called at that time. Find ways where we cooperate in spite of all the difficulties. And I think an approach like this we should have again. Russia will not be in the Western camp. Putin made that clear 2007 at the Munich Security Conference. I do my own thing, but he's there. It's nuclear armed, and in a way we have to find common ground and a balance of interests. I remember Reagan meeting Gorbachev in Reykjavik in 1986, and then they had all the subjects on the table, and they said, well, here we agree and here we don't agree. But it was the beginning of some confidence building again. And I think it is terrible what happened to Navalny. And I'm absolutely, as Dan said, I'm a transatlanticist. But I always have believed that there is no peace in Europe without Russia. And the German experience, we have twice invaded that country. And we brought terror and millions of dead people to Russia. And I want never to happen that again. I've been in Leningrad at the grave. 700,000 Russians died in this blockade of Leningrad. One of the most cruel things in World War II. Never again. And therefore, show them a strong fist when it comes to their military power. I'm in favor of the 2% of Germany that could be part of that package. But on the other hand, always have a hand for dialogue and try to find places to negotiate. And that brings me to the moratorium issue. Unfortunately, the moratorium is not anymore a solution. We have 95% of Nord Stream finished. I don't want to have a ruin there in the Baltic Sea. I believe that those who talk about moratorium today mean, by and large, to stop the program, and therefore I don't buy this as a compromise solution. I think there are more mature ideas around that we have heard from Václav and Daniel today.
We have 2 notes on why in this debate there is not being Russian gas taken as a political tool. Ambassador of Latvia and Czech Republic mentions that Latvia's position is that they see Nord Stream as a political project, and another attendees emphasizing that while Russia is understanding Russian gas as a political tool, then here we don't, at least during this debate, we are not talking about Russian gas as a political tool, but maybe we have explained a little bit the position with the infrastructure question, that those countries who made their homework already, they don't have to feel this this pressure from the political tool. But we have two concrete questions, one to Ambassador Fried, one to Ambassador Bartushka. So let's go to the United States for a while again. Both questions are connected with the Nord Stream 2 and 3 Seas initiative. I have my own opinion about this initiative because in the Czech Republic it's not a very popular topic and it's misused by our president, but let's take it as a kind of possible infrastructure tool, as it was meant probably from the beginning, but not very well explained. And the question to Ambassador Fried is if you can elaborate a little bit more about how 3 Seas initiative could contribute to mitigation of the Nord Stream 2 issue. Which projects, in your view, could be implemented?
Well, the 3 Seas, you're talking about the 3 Seas initiative,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The 3 Seas initiative brings together the countries, basically post-89 Europe plus Austria, and it's supposed to develop commercially viable infrastructure projects in energy, transport, and digital. It was a political project at first, but it is now getting some commercial reality to it. And it could be an ideal vehicle for support for the kinds of gas initiatives that we were discussing that could mitigate the problem of Nord Stream 2, interconnectors, LNG facilities, but also green energy projects. Now, the United States, Poland, and a number of other countries have put in some money into the 3 Seas Initiative Investment Fund. The United States is not a member, neither is Germany. But I can easily, this is a good project. It brings together countries. I understand that it has some history, and the Czechs remember, because of the association of intermarium, the Czechs might have been reserved because in the history of 20th century quarrels, among the stupidest quarrels was between the Czech Republic and Poland in the 1920s and 30s. Okay, so that was just stupid and awful. But the 3 Seas initiative is a pretty good idea, actually, and it's pro-European. It's always said so. Germany has attended its summits at very high levels. President Steinmeier was there. So if you're looking for a practical way forward, right, to come up with some arrangement on Nord Stream 2, the 3 Seas initiative could be part of the mix. Put in some resources. The United States has done it. Poland has done it. Is it possible for the EBRD or Germany or the Commission to do it? I don't know. Is that a possible way around the tendency not to support any more fossil fuel projects with EU money? I don't know. But this is the sort of, look, if I know the EU practice, for every obstacle, there is also a way to work around the obstacle if you want to do it. Okay? If you want to do it. And if the Greens, right, anti-fossil fuel in principle, are also anti-Nord Stream 2, maybe you could convince them to help if it's tied to the Poles getting out of coal. I mean, coal is bad, is much worse in terms of climate change than natural gas. Natural gas is a transition, could be seen as a transition energy source. You see what I'm driving at? Figure out a way to use the tools you have to put together a deal and make it work?
I would just say that now the Three Seas initiative is more associated with megalomaniac plans of our president to build concrete channels between Three Seas than with the historical questions. But maybe let's put this similar or same question to Ambassador Bartuška about where he sees any potential for energy infrastructure in the Three Seas initiative.
Wow. Well, I think that the decrease of EU funding for any fossil projects is real and will be visible pretty soon. So if there is a need for, let's say, gas pipelines or interconnectors, countries will be looking for help, and this could be one of the sources, definitely. And there's great Polish interest into building their own sphere of gas market. Poland doesn't want to be linked to Rotterdam because they would have to go through Germany. We're back at history, of course. So Poland is not part of the Northwestern European gas market. Poland is on its own. They would like to build their own gas market with the Balts, with Ukraine, with Slovakia, perhaps others. So, why not? I think that the gas market of Northwestern Europe is bigger, more liquid, and better for us, but I would never tell Poles to actually change their mind on anything because they are great in what they do. So this could be one of the things. And just one last detail, because it was mentioned here by my German colleague that Nord Stream 2 was never a political project, or they see it more as a commercial project. Look, let's be honest. Energy, any large-scale energy project is always hugely political. There's a Keystone XL pipeline in the US, which is basically a touchstone of politics in many ways in the US. And what we discuss here about interconnectors, this is hugely political as well. Even a small pipeline can be hugely important. If it connects, for example, Bulgaria with Greece and brings additional gas to Bulgaria, it can change totally the equation in that country, political equation. So energy is politics quite often. And for my country, we do support diversification, and we are happy when our neighbors are diversified. And last small detail, maybe why we are actually quite happy about our situation at the moment. Let's not forget that exactly 2 years ago, the famous Russian energy weapon actually did not work out. In April 2019, the oil pipeline called Druzhba was shut down not because Russia wanted to blackmail Central Europeans, but because it was full of dirty oil. And all of us who are supplied by Druzhba, which means Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic, and eastern part of Germany, plus Ukraine and Belarus, all of us easily survived 2 months with no Russian deliveries whatsoever. So that probably also puts some explanation into why we're not as worried as we used to be. We saw it. We saw Russia basically humiliated by being unable to export its own oil. They had to shut down also the ports of Usť-Luga and Novorossiysk. So, the reality is sometimes much more, let's say, interesting than it may seem from the headlines. Thank you.
Martin, may I?
I will just add one thing, and then you will have
Sure.
a word, because there is a question which is connected with that, about how the situation has changed during the last 10 years. And the attendee is asking if the situation has changed in terms that has transparency significantly increased on the Russian side to assuage these fears of the espionage and political pressure. But I think that Václav partially answered this question, but I think now it's also your turn to put a little bit more on that.
Well, I think the point that Václav made with the modernization of, and I think Dan also, with the modernization of the pipeline, that could be part of that package too, that we're discussing. So it could be 3 seasons, a prolongment of the Ukraine transit agreement, there are a lot of possibilities, but one could be a joint project of European companies, well, perhaps even US companies, of Russian and Ukrainian companies in modernizing the Ukrainian transit system. That is ecologically important. It is economically important. Václav made the point of the meters that are missing on the Ukrainian-Russian borders. So perhaps a part of this and a long-term perspective could be the joint modernization of this this pipeline. Well, you made the point with using gas as a weapon. Well, I did not deny that Russia did that with Central and Eastern European countries in the past. Today, I would say they have perhaps in some very small parts of Europe, there is still some leverage for that. But by and large, with all the reforms in the last 10 years, with this LNG and interconnectors and storage facilities, that is not possible anymore. And therefore, I say today we can look to these things more from a commercial possibility. Of course, there are geopolitical connotations and reasons and points of view. By the way, not only from the Russian side. The Trump administration used gas as a weapon dramatically. They wanted not only energy independence, but energy domination. Trump went out and said these are freedom molecules. I mean, that LNG, well, the LNG campaigns in Europe, that was business from the US side, but it was also the attempt to win political influence and get the Russians out. So it is not only Russia which from time to time used energy as a tool. It was also and is also the United States of America. And I hope that Mr. Biden, I understand the pressures in Congress, but if he's really serious with a new start in Europe, he at a certain moment has to tell Congress, I'm not going to put sanctions on European companies. I acknowledge what Dan said, the progress that has been made with billions of euros in the energy infrastructure in Europe. We will do more things, but I will refuse for my government sanctions, extraterritorial sanctions against allies. And if he doesn't find that courage, then we will not have a new start in the transatlantic relationship, I'm afraid.
We have a question a little bit connected with that from Emma Schubert. In terms of facilitating geopolitical stability, Ambassador Fried mentioned the potential power of appealing to Russian society at large. In light of the realities of the anti-democratic tendencies of the Russian government, can we expect appeals to the Russian public to be effective and productive? Václav Bartuška has his own experience with Russian public in the last couple of decades. So, Václav.
Well, honestly, can we expect in any country in the world that the voices from outside speaking to the people, let's change your government, that people would be happy about it? The pressure to change has to come from inside Russia. I don't really think that it's our job or our duty to change Russian political system. And the best example to Russia we gave, if we are free, happy, hopefully rich or richer, if we function well, if our political system functions well, if our legal system functions well, and so forth. In terms of propaganda, I grew up in a socialist country, which had extremely well-organized propaganda, which totally failed in everything it was trying to say. We were blanketed from early morning till late evening with messages about how Germany is suffering from high unemployment, and in America, everybody's dying of hunger, and we all wanted to live in the West. Propaganda fails real life is in the end important. So Russian public, I think people see with their own income, with their own money, how the country is doing. They see how much they can buy, how much things cost, where they can go for vacation, and so forth. There is a lot for us to improve in our own countries, so let's do it first. And when we are satisfied with what we have and happy about it, then we can go lecture others, okay? I'm still not quite happy with my own country, so I'm not going to lecture Russians about how they should live.
Thank you. We have approaching.
Dan Fried is there. Dan Fried.
Dan Fried, yeah.
I remember communist propaganda, and I also remember Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty broadcasting from Munich. Those were effective. They brought voices of Central Europeans working with Americans, but they were representing their own countries in lieu of a free press that was not allowed under communism. When I say we should reach out to Russian civil society, it's not because I think we're perfect, because we're clearly not. My country especially, we're not perfect. But we have a long history of supporting democracy, including in the communist world. And we were imperfect then too. And yet, does anyone in the Czech Republic, or do you, Václav, think that RFERL was a bad idea? What does RFERL mean today? It's not radio stations, but shouldn't we be supporting independent journalism in countries like Russia that don't have it? Supporting investigative journalism? Supporting efforts to uncover Putin's corruption? The future of Russia is and should be in the hands of Russians. I agree. But is there a role for democracies to support democratic structures and structures of freedom in other countries? Putin hates that. But what does the Cold War show us? Right? You know very well what the United States did for solidarity in Poland. And, you know, Charter 77. And, you know, there's a good history of this sort of thing. And this is not just Americans. I mean, the European Endowment for Democracy is a European idea. It came out, I think the European Parliament pushed it. It's a good idea. There are many ways to divide up Russian experts in the West. The two ways I like to do it is the debate between those in the West who think that Russians are incapable of democracy under any circumstances. Incapable. And those who believe that Russia is capable, in fact, but have suffered from terrible conditions and worse leadership. But they are not fated to be as corrupt and authoritarian as Putin is now. It is not necessarily so. I remember arguments that other people, it used to be assumed that Germans were incapable of democracy, right? Or the Japanese with the samurai spirit, all nonsense, all complete nonsense. This is an interesting theme. And it's not to do with Nord Stream 2. But Nord Stream 2 forces us to think about our common Russia policy. And I will defend and advocate for reaching out to Russian society, exchanges. Okay, last point. Germany was very big on exchanges, building bridges, bringing people over, and Germany was right. that was the part of Ostpolitik that really, really worked out well, right? Reaching out to people in the communist world, and some of the right in America were very skeptical about this. But it turns out that these modest programs have a cumulative, an effect that grows over time. Fascinating discussion, worth continuing. But on Nord Stream 2, let me just say that if we fight about the principle of US sanctions, we're just going to get Germany and Americans yelling at each other. Who cares? That's a stupid, that's not the right discussion to have. The discussion is, how can we achieve the agreed end state of a solidarity and a completely integrated gas market where Putin's potential leverage really is reduced to zero? Friedberg, I think that's your goal. I don't think we're there yet. I think we could get there. And agreeing that we have to get there and making that real seems to be, that's my favorite way ahead.
Well, then don't tell me that the Nord Stream 2 is only a business project after this, when we go here.
Of course, it's not a business project. The president of Germany said it wasn't a business project. He said it had a strategic dimension. So don't take my word for it. Ask President Steinmeier.
But nobody ever denied in Germany that it has a strategic dimension that is also geopolitics. What Angela Merkel meant was, we have today a buyer's market. It's a liquid market. It is 5 companies. There is no subsidies in it. If you want to stop the whole thing, you have to pay a lot of compensations, and therefore it is, in the first place, a business model, that a business project. That there are geopolitical implications. We are not naive. I mean, we're not completely naive.
I get that. I get that.
But I would love to comment on Václav's and Dan Fried's general remarks about our Russia policy. I wrote my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, on idealism and realism in US foreign policy. So the Carter approach and the Kissinger approach. As a young man, I was a Carterite. And I know Carter had supported Charter 77 and Sakharov and met Solzhenitsyn in the White House. And I thought that was great. Today, I'm more with Kissinger. And I believe that the first thing we have to do is what Mr. Bartushka said, live up with our own example, make it a beacon of freedom and a model for the whole world. The second should be, of course, to interfere when there are grave violations of human rights, with press, with Radio Free Europe and institutions like that, with the civil society, no doubt about that. But at the other hand, we should be very careful not to embark on new crusades, not to believe that our idealism can change the world. Then we can have very negative examples in Vietnam, in Iraq. Well, the whole Arab Spring thing didn't work very well. We cannot put our ideas of Westminster democracies, just import them all over the world. Have to be very, very careful to do that. And there has to be a little, well, what governments do and what the civil societies do is 2 different things. And sometimes we should look to geopolitical realities. Do we push the Russians into the arms of the Chinese if you continue like this? There was another piece in the Atlantic Council on China, very interesting piece, the longer telegram, very important to define China. And one point in this telegram was, let us find a new balance in our relationship with Russia, because the worst thing we can do is to put these 2 countries together. And if you look how they work together on Sputnik 5, on the Moon Project, on technology, on weapons, on energy, we should look to it that there is not a new coalition arising. And therefore I say criticism to Russia, okay, but also cooperation wherever it is possible.
This is one big topic on which we can spend derived from Nord Stream 2 long time. And then we have two questions connected with another big topic, which is climate change. And these questions are a little bit in contradiction to each other. One is asking if Nord Stream 2 could somehow push out the renewables from the, or to make renewables too expensive in the Green Deal policy, which is coming from the EU in the coming years. And the other question is asking if Nord Stream is not redundant because we are going to the CO2 less emission world. So if you wouldn't like to spend like next hour to discuss this, but may I ask you about this, Nord Stream, getting back to the original topic of Nord Stream 2, what if you see any kind of a connection between Nord Stream 2 and the new Green Deal in the European Union in terms of pricing, in terms of pushing different policies? Maybe let's go from Václav Bartuška first.
When you talk to Russians about Nord Stream 2 these days, and if they really actually know something about European direction when it comes to climate change, they often say that Nord Stream 1 was actually a good project commercially, and Nord Stream 2 came too late. And it is quite likely that if it comes into operation, it will over time become a stranded asset, because we're phasing out fossil fuels. Coal is first, but natural gas will not be much behind. And the whole idea of 100 years of pipeline operation and so forth, that's just not going to happen. We talk about being CO2 neutral by 2050, which is not that far away. I mean, it's just 30 years. So I think that the whole idea of Nord Stream 2 comes from a different time. From the time when you would have coal and oil and natural gas forever, and that is fundamentally changing now, definitely in Europe. So I think much of the calm in Europe or Western Europe about Nord Stream 2, much of that calm comes from the belief that the pipeline will be less and less important as time progresses. Maybe it's mistaken belief, but it's actually a very strong belief.
Mr. Flieger?
Well, I see all the points that Václav made, and without any doubt, we are moving into a direction where fossil fuels play less and less a role. I'm in favor of helping the Russians, cooperating with the Russians in the field of reforestation. Have an enormous potential there of building up their, especially wind potential, biomass potential. So I absolutely agree that we should, when we look to Russia, not only talk about gas anymore, but more and more about renewables and hydrogen. And the Gazprom people that I know understand that pretty well. You might know that I'm an advisor to Nord Stream, as I was an advisor to the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline and LNG terminals. And I tell them time and again, look what you can do in hydrogen. And they tell me 80% of Nord Stream 2 can, that 80% of Nord Stream 2 can be filled with hydrogen. So they are knowing this situation, at least the smart people in Gazprom. And that is the future. They will try their utmost that it will not be a stranded investment. But if it is so, it is not something where the European taxpayers bear the burden. And for the next 10 or 20 years, we will use and need gas. Germany phases out coal. Germany phases out next year nuclear. So for a long transition period, we will need natural gas And for the time afterwards, I think hydrogen will play an enormous role.
And maybe to Ambassador, free to add to that, if this kind of transatlantic approach could be packed into the climate policy change.
I think the Biden administration would be intrigued by that. I'm not enough of an energy expert, but my instinct tells me that Freebird is right. Hydrogen is coming. So since I'm trying to think of the elements of a package around Nord Stream 2, include, and since the Commission, as Václav said, since the European Commission is not going to be paying money for fossil fuels, does hydrogen, is our hydrogen projects and support for hydrogen projects something that could be added to this mix that we've all been talking about for the past hour about how to mitigate the potential risks of Nord Stream 2 in a way that would capture support from the green side of the political spectrum? I mean, maybe. As I said, I'm not enough of an energy expert to go into the numbers, but this is the kind of conversation that needs to happen. And the fight over sanctions and the origins of Nord Stream and all of this is going to waste our time. So I think the hydrogen issue, maybe build it into 3Cs, maybe build it into this package that we've been discussing. As I said, the Biden people tend to be pro-green for the right reasons. It's good policy. I sense opportunity here. That said, I'm not an energy expert. You need people who are. I have some in mind. If you ask, no, I know some Americans who could put together this package better than I could.
Thank you very much. We are approaching the end of our discussion. We have no questions unanswered. And I would like to ask for the final word, Jan Macháček, who is chairman of the board of the Institute for Politics and Society. Honzo, floor is yours.
Good afternoon or early evening. I would like to thank all of you, all of the panelists and participants in this discussion. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Wiedbert. Thank you, Václav. And I would like to summarize a few things, even though I didn't participate in the discussion. It seems to me that we have very different perspectives about the same issue, and obviously German perspective based on its historical experience with Russia is different than the perspective of others. It seems to me that Germans always knew that they are capable of doing business with Russia, and they are not attacked by Russia unless it is the Germans who are attacking first, if I am permitted to use this historical perspective. And this is completely different historical experience than is the experience of Poles and Baltic countries, and obviously the perspective of Ukraine is completely different. So I think it would be very useful to try to reach to focus more on a European perspective as such, or to define European perspective about this issue as such. Like, what is the European perspective? What it should be? Is this new pipeline going to increase dependency of Europe as such on Russian gas or not? This is a very important question. Also, a very important question is the Atlantic perspective about the whole issue. So it's not only, is there anything like common Atlantic perspective about the Nord Stream 2? If not, we should definitely try to define it. It's a pity we didn't have a direct participation. We tried, as far as I know, from Poles or Ukrainians, but we know that some of the important people from these countries were listening to these discussions or will replay it in later. But also with Czech Republic. Like Czech Republic at this moment has this like little bit convenient position, which has to do with its location, and some would even feel that it's a typical position for Czech, that we kind of, okay, so we have our interconnectors, we invested into it, we are sort of safe because Russian gas comes here through Germany. We are not actually buying Russian gas, we are buying something in Rotterdam, it's a business, etc. But on the other hand, we have an understanding also as a NATO member that the experience of Poles and Ukrainians, etc., and Baltic countries is completely different. So my point is that we should try to build more European perspective and European opinion about our issue, and we should try to build. And Mr. Fried was trying to emphasize it also, as far as I understand it, that we should try to build a common Atlantic position, because we have very different positions of different countries based on their historical experience, and which includes America. Also, America is a main guarantor and main investor into the protection of eastern flank of NATO countries, and it is clear that it is not welcoming the increased dependency on Russian gas. And this doesn't depend if it's under President Trump or Obama or Biden. The criticism has always been here, and if it was a soft criticism, it didn't work. If it was like more brutal, like under Trump, it also didn't work. But there are many different perspectives, and there is a lack of some common perspective. And I hope the discussion like this, and I would like to thank Alf again for helping to organize it. The discussions like this would help to find a more common ground and common perspective about this strategic issue. So thank you very much, and hope to see you again in some better, perhaps face-to-face experience after the pandemic is over. So we would be happy to meet physically also. So thank you very much. Thank you also, Martin, for great moderating, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, Honzo. I would also like to thank not only to our panelists, but also to our interpreters, because this was possible to hear in Czech as well. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for participating in the discussion. I hope that you made a lot of notes, as I did, at least, and you get some kind of inspiration for my work, your work, and some food for thought. So I hope to see you as soon as possible live sometime somewhere.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.